guys, welcome to part 3 of the Blockade Runner build. I'm still working on the engine section, and there's some pitting in here, as you can see, a lot of bubbles. I'm going to have to fill all these in because you will be able to see this once the engines are mounted. So that all has to be fixed. What I'll do is I'm going to fill this in with putty and sand everything down just to get rid of them. But you can see there's quite a few of them. So, can't have that. Alright, so I filled in a lot of these holes with just Tamiya putty, and I'm using it's like a clay, I think it's actually like a clay sculpture tool. I'm just working that in. There's also holes in all these engine parts here, and the bottoms, tops, whatever, that would be visible, so I'm filling those in, and I'm kind of just going over, pressing that putty into the holes so I can sand it off later and everything will be filled in. There are a lot of bubbles on these engine parts in this engine section. So I'm done with my first pass on the putty to cover all these holes, and I'm going to wait for this to dry. I'm going to sand it off, and then I'm going to put another coat on if I have to, just so everything's nice and smooth. Normally, if there's this kind of a large area that I need to use putty on, I wouldn't use the Tamiya. I would use this, which is cheaper. It's glazing putty. It's by Bondo. It dries really fast, probably like 10 minutes. It'll be dry and ready to sand. But there's another reason why I didn't use it is because if you sand this stuff down, the dust is cancer-causing agent. So I wouldn't sand it indoors. Even if I had a mask on, I wouldn't sand it indoors. I would bring it outside. And it's cold here in Pennsylvania, so I don't feel like bringing this outside to sand it, so I decided to use the Tamiya putty. So that's why I'm using that. And also, because this stuff is red, dries red, it's a light red, but I'm painting this white again, so it would be a lot more difficult to paint over red. I'd end up with pink, and it would probably need like 3 coats to turn white. So yet another reason not to use it, but I do use this stuff a lot for large areas, especially on resin kits. See, I've made some progress, but it's been slow going. I just want to make sure that everything gets lined up as best as I can do, and make sure everything's straight, everything's painted. That took a long time because these parts are just huge, and there's just all kinds of areas to get into, and it's white, so I know it looks really bright right now. I haven't really weathered it yet. So I added all my detail on the engines. I attached the top 2 rows, or the top row and the bottom row, and then I added the detail pieces that go in that you can't really put on until you connect the engine to the engine mount. So I had to get in there and put on 4 of them, and on each side on the inside, so I couldn't do that if I had these 3 engines installed. So I got my lighting working. If you could see, all my bulbs are working. So if you're going to build this and light it, you're in for a lot of drilling, just so you know. I'm sure you realize that, but I had to drill holes I used the drill press for this, just to make sure everything lined up right. So I have all my holes drilled in the engines to run the wire through. I have my holes drilled in the base section. I just have to run the wire for the center engine. So the way I line these up, if you built a Blockade Runner, I'm sure you understand these engines are the worst part of the build. So to make my life easier, and I'm all about making my life easier, I made a template that I had printed, And I did all the math, and I figured out where everything should be, and as far as distance and everything else, and I made this so everything lines up right. So I have all the engines. I can use this to hold the engines in place while I epoxied and glued them. And I have them all set for the center engine too. So these should all line up. That's as big as I could print. I couldn't print an area that was, 6 engines or whatever. My printer wasn't big enough. So this is what I came up with. I also printed a section here to hold this piece in place while I'm working on it, because I knew I was going to be working on this thing for a while, and I needed something to make sure that it was level, or sort of level, and at least not going anywhere when I was working on it. Other than that, I have my other 3 engines ready to go. I'm probably going to install those today, so I should have all the engines done shortly. This thing's so big that what I did was I painted the detail. There's lines, there's panels on these pieces that go in the side here. I'm doing all this beforehand because I don't want to put all my engines together and then paint it and then try and mask off these areas. Just easier for me. I'm sure I've seen other guys, they put the whole thing together and then they paint it. Whatever works for you. I also painted the red side fins, and those are weathered. There's only 4 red ones, I think. The rest are all white, and they're all painted. So once I get all the engines together and done, the rest should, in theory, be all downhill. I'm working on some other pieces that are part of the hull, and I don't know if this is, typical of this kit or it's just my parts, but I needed to sand. I used a drum sander to make this hole bigger here and this hole larger on the inside so these parts will fit. They didn't fit when I got the kit without doing anything to the parts. They were this piece was too big to fit in there, and this piece was too small to fit on here. So now it fits good, nice and snug. Also, these are the guns in the front section that would go on here behind the bridge or cockpit section. So this top and bottom guns. One thing I noticed when I actually saw this model in person, the actual filming model, it's like 6 feet long or whatever, at the Franklin Institute in Philly, probably like 15 years ago. And I noticed there was a light on top of this gun that I never really noticed before. So then I looked in the reference pictures and it's definitely there. So I'm going to run some fiber through that part so that will light up on top and bottom. Alright, another thing I wanted to show you guys is the actual cannons that go on top, port and starboard. And I already painted these and primered them, and I opened up some of the parts that were provided with the kit. This is really nice. This is probably one of the first resin kits I ever built where I didn't have to redo the guns. So they give you the metal barrel, which is pre-made. It's hollow. I don't even have to drill out the holes or anything. That will fit in the top like this, and then there's a cap piece that goes on, and that gets glued on to there. So basically you have the whole gun set up. You don't have to do anything. You just got to put 3 pieces together, and that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to paint them again, and I'm going to weather them and do whatever else I see in the reference pictures. It looks like they're kind of beat up, so I'm going to have to do some weathering on these guns. But very happy with the gun setup, because it's going to save me a lot of time and not having to redo parts, which is awesome. Just one more thing for this episode, part, whatever you want to call it. So these are I think I mentioned before, I had painted these fins, and before I'm going to put them on, just because it would be a lot easier to apply them instead of masking and all that other stuff. What I did with these, I painted these, I primered them, I painted them white. I think it was like an insignia white, and then I painted them with this enamel. This is Archive X. This is SP Daylight Red, which I think was used on the Blockade Runner. It looks very bright. But before I did that, I actually took some of this stuff, which is Humbrol. It's Maskol. It's very thick. You can put it on a couple different ways. There's a lot of ways you can put it on. But if you want to achieve some sort of random chipping and everything else, you can use a paintbrush. You can use one of these things, which is like a little applicator. You can dab it on and then use a wet paper towel to remove some of it. It dries really fast, and it will mask, anything you underneath is going to get masked, and then it just peels right off after you put the paint over it. So if you want 3 colors, in this instance I just use white underneath, and some other sections I use gray first, masked the gray, then painted it white, then masked the white, and then painted it red. So there are a couple different colors that are showing. So that's what I use for the chipping on these, and I think it looks pretty good. I tried to follow the patterns on the real model as best I could. You're never going to get it exact, but at least not me. I just get it close. So that's what I did with these. And then after I painted the red, the Maskol was still on there. I painted them red, and then I went over it with a mist of this. This is a SP Lark Dark Gray by Archive X. And what that will do is it will tone down the red. It will give you essentially an entirely different color. It's going to darken the red. It's going to show like a little more weathering on there. It really is just a fantastic paint to work with, and it really gets a cool effect, because you're getting a different color from the red, and at the same time you're getting some weathering. And you can see, I think there's some black or some dark gray here. You don't have to go too heavy with it. You just kind of mist it, and you'll see the color actually change. So that's what I did with these. That's why it's a darker gray or darker red than you'll see if you look at the actual pot. You'll see that the red is a lot brighter, but that was too bright, so I wanted to tone it down. And I'm going to do that with all the red on the model, so it looks a little darker and a little more beat up. So that's about it for now, guys. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.